The story I'm going to talk about comes from the Silmarillion. If you are a Tolkien fan, you already know what story this is probably, because it is one of the most profound, impactful, awe-inspiring stories in Tolkien's lore. This story is operating on a few levels because it is not just great writing, it is not just an epic journey. There's things that have never been depicted in Lord of the Rings, in The Hobbit, in the small amount that I've seen in Rings of Power. And there's just truly new stuff here. And not just that, but very emotional stuff here. And on a very realistic level, this story means a lot to Tolkien himself, and I'll get into those reasons. But to set the mood, to set the tone, I want to read to you the opening lines of this story. Among the tales of sorrow and of ruin that come down to us from the darkness of those days, there are yet some in which amid weeping there is joy, and under the shadow of death, light that endures. And of these histories most fair still in the ears of the elves is the tale of Beren and Lúthien. Right off the bat from those opening lines, Tolkien is telling you in the context of the world, the weight of this story, and how even among the elves, this story is regarded with such awe and such respect. So, for those of you who don't know, the Silmarillion is Tolkien's life's work. He has been working on this since, I think, like 1915, 1917, something like that, since he was a young student at Oxford and while he was serving in World War I. This story is essentially the Bible of Middle-earth. It's full of origin tales from the beginning of time to all the way to the events of the Lord of the Rings. So it covers the first, second, and third age. And I believe even a little bit of the fourth age. I haven't finished it yet. Almost there. I am not a Tolkien expert. I'm not a Tolkien scholar. I'm just a very passionate fan who is diving into this world in the last couple of years. Which is why I'm coming at this from the perspective of a film fan. That's why my argument is why this needs to be a cinematic adaptation. Tolkien was working on the Silmarillion his entire life. He unfortunately never got to see it published. He never got to see its light of day. Publishers just kept rejecting the story because it was just so dense. It was more than a fantasy novel. It was like a Bible. It was like a bunch of historical accounts of this fantastical mythological world. And just like modern audiences of the films today, back then the book readers, only the hobbits are the heroes. And the Silmarillion is almost entirely absent of hobbits. So it just was, from a publisher's perspective, it was not a feasible thing to publish something like this. But yeah, thank you, Christopher Tolkien, because now we have everything. So what makes Beren and Lúthien so special? Again, it's very multi-layered. So this story is very near and dear to Tolkien's heart. It's a very personal story. Lúthien, the elf maiden in the story, is said to be the most beautiful elf who ever lived. Or I believe even the most beautiful creature to ever walk Middle-earth. And Tolkien was heavily inspired from his wife, Edith. And she was his muse in this particular story. And after she died, Tolkien had the name Lúthien inscribed on her tombstone. My introduction to this story, to taking the plunge into reading the Silmarillion, came from reading a biography on Tolkien where it touches on letters that he wrote to his son. And it's just beautiful expression towards his wife. And I made a video on that. It's a very bad video. It's my second video of all time. So, so check the video out if you want. Let me know if you could power through it. But I go more into detail of my experience with those letters and learning more about Tolkien and where he's coming from. And then after Tolkien died himself, his children inscribed a Beren on his tombstone. It's a romantic, real story that is tied to this Middle-earth story. And you may be surprised to know that this is not the first time you've heard of Beren and Lúthien. In The Fellowship of the Ring, it is referenced in both the book and in the film. They reference it in the same scene, but for different reasons. In the book, it's because that the hobbits are a little uneasy and they're trying to go to sleep, and Aragorn has all this knowledge. And I believe Samwise is the one who wants to hear tales of the elves. And Aragorn obliges, and he tells the tale of Beren and Lúthien. And he sings a song about it, and then he goes into great length in giving some context and lore. And, the purpose in the book is probably more so to world build and to add to the fact that Aragorn is old and he has so much knowledge, and just to add more mystery and intrigue to Aragorn. In the film, it's very explicitly obvious that it's foreshadowing Arwen. It's foreshadowing that romance. Peter Jackson and his writers, Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens, they were heavily inspired by the tale of Beren and Lúthien when expanding the romance of Arwen and Aragorn. Arwen is important, their romance does exist, but she is not at all a main character like she is in the films, you know? It just goes to show you the reverence this story has, because even the writers were looking to this tale because this is the standard. This is the great romance tale of Middle Earth. So, what is Beren and Lúthien about? Well, just like The Hobbit, just like The Lord of the Rings, there's a very simple objective that needs to be fulfilled, but then a lot of obstacles are in the way, or there's dark forces at hand, and just the story becomes very complex because of all these external forces. And it's the same here. So the story begins in the middle of this very major war with Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, before Sauron. Beren is a mortal man, and his father, along with his entire company, are all slaughtered by the servants of Morgoth. He takes his revenge, and now he has nothing to live for except vengeance. So he just spends the next 4 years in this forest, essentially Batman being the Punisher, just hiding in the forest and just slaughtering all of. It becomes too much and he has to flee. No man has ever crossed into this realm before. Once he crosses, he meets a beautiful elf maiden named Lúthien, and they fall in love. She tends to his wounds. All of those romantic cliches happen. The damaged soldier and like the beautiful, gentle woman, you know? So she helps him. They fall in love together, and then they get betrayed. Someone finds them out, and then they go before her father, who is the king of that realm. And her disapproving father rejects this romance, and he does not like men whatsoever. But Lúthien's love is great, and he does care for his daughter a lot, so he does not want to simply just slay him. So he's a little cunning in the way he deals with this. I will give you the hand of my daughter, the most precious thing to me, if you essentially go on a suicide mission and take a Silmaril from the crown of Morgoth. And a Silmaril is essentially a very sacred, powerful, magical gem to elves. And Morgoth has 3 of these gems on his iron crown. The king, Thingol, he does this because he knows either 1, you're not going to do it, or 2, you're going to die trying. And both work out for him because he keeps his daughter. And as you probably may have guessed, their love is that great, and Beren will stop at nothing. So Beren goes on this mission. And that is essentially the tale. Now, what makes the story so amazing is that it is not a man's quest, and Lúthien is just in the castle, just sulking and pleading to her father, please, you know, like, she is very prominent in this story, and she has magical ability. There's a lot of lore, like I said. Her mother is like an angelic being, so Lúthien is gifted with very strong magical abilities, with enchantments. And Lúthien does not listen to her father. She chases after him, and this story is 2 lovers facing the devil himself, essentially. And it is just such an epic romance tale. And the last act of this story is just mind-boggling. There is just, you enter the spiritual realm, which we have never seen in Lord of the Rings films. You will experience things you have never experienced before in a fantasy film, honestly, not just in the Middle Earth films. And this story is full of a myriad of dark creatures. There's vampires in this story, there's werewolves in this story, there's all manner of big hounds, there's the giant birds that we see in the Lord of the Rings. The odds are completely against them. And the story does not end in the way you think, but not in a bad way. The story is extremely profound, extremely beautiful, and extremely emotional. And the reason why I'm even talking about this story, the entire story, not just the story in the Silmarillion, but the story surrounding Tolkien and his wife, the entire thing just touched me very deeply. So obviously I care about this story, but also this just got sparked again because of the War of the Rohirrim. And I just want to make some compare and contrast, because I was very disappointed by that film, and I don't know if anyone else was disappointed by that as well. I just felt like it was lacking compelling characters, a hero's journey to root for, and to really get something new, you know? And from my understanding, the War of the Rohirrim is 100% based off of a small historical account in Tolkien lore. And I know the writers tried their best, you know, I don't think they phoned it in. I'm sure they're passionate fans and they tried their best, but that's the thing. There's only so much you can do when you're expanding such a small amount. And they're not Tolkien, you know? What makes Tolkien so special is his voice, his writing. From my understanding, that story is literally just the significant events and the players involved, but there's not really dialogue. There's no real character motivations here, except defending my house, avenging my father, you know, those types of simple motivations. And Beren and Lúthien is just so different. It's different on so many levels to the rest of the tales of the Silmarillion. Like, the entire Silmarillion is like a Bible, as I said, and Tolkien's voice does come out, but it is still a mythical legend that Tolkien is telling. And you do get his voice when you hear about good versus evil, his expressions of the holy, his expressions of the divine, but it is still archaic and mythical in its prose. Beren and Lúthien is a short story. It's only about 30 pages. If you're a film fan, you know that short stories tend to make the best type of films because there's enough there to expand it, but it's not overwhelming in how much we need to adapt. So it's the perfect amount that we could expand, but it's not too much where you're gonna condense. And in this story, it's perfect. It's an outline that Tolkien essentially does all the story beats, but there is dialogue. There is more fleshing out. And this story is that perfect balance, much like The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, but not to that extent. Because in those books, Tolkien did something truly groundbreaking, where it was an epic mythological type of fantasy story in the style of a novel where you really flesh out these characters. Beren and Lúthien is very similar to that prose. And I just feel like this story has everything we would want. Tolkien wrote it in such a way where we get everything we would need for an adaptation. And if this story was to get adapted, I would just caution the writers to not change the source material too much, you know? I would focus more so on the storytelling of it all, the cinematic devices that are at your disposal. Use the format of film to your advantage, visual storytelling, and not adding so much dialogue, so many other scenes because you're not talking. you can't replicate that. And again, I just feel like if this story was done right, if this was adapted correctly, this would be such a profound cinematic experience for everyone. It would transcend, I mean, like the Lord of the Rings, it would transcend the fantasy audience. It would become a blockbuster event, and it would be something we have not experienced before. It would leave your imagination thoroughly stimulated. And again, this love story, that last act that I do not want to spoil for the non-Tolkien fans and Silmarillion readers, I don't want to spoil it for you, but it's truly epic. And at the end of the day, this is an epic romance. And how many years has it been since we've gotten a truly great epic romance in a film? It's been a long time. So this film would just work on so many levels and just be so special. And I feel like this story truly deserves a cinematic adaptation. Well, those are my ramblings. I hope I was coherent. I hope I've persuaded people to check this story out. Even if you don't want to read the Silmarillion, perhaps watch some videos. Nerd of the Rings, I'm sure he has a video detailing this story. I hope this gets made, and I hope it is done correctly. But of course, I only wanted to focus on this story, and I only wanted to just express and dream. But I know there is a lot of logistical issues, perhaps, with adapting a story like this, because it is tied within the Silmarillion, within all of these other major tales. It's weaved together with these major conflicts that you would need to establish. So I understand it would be a very difficult adaptation, but if it's difficult, it's worth doing, right? Let me know your thoughts on my thoughts, as always, and thanks for watching.